Yes, colonization is not the only reason for poverty in Africa, but it is the biggest reason for poverty in Africa.
Of your articles where you make reference to these rating systems, the bottom 10 countries for doing business in the world: Chad, Haiti, Central African Republic, Congo Democratic Republic, South Sudan, Libya, Yemen, Venezuela, there's a lovely example, Eritrea and Somalia. And so there are three exceptions in the African ecosystem: Mauritius, Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, Botswana, and Zambia. You pointed out in your prospectus, is it prospectus article?
Yeah, prospectus article of Artbridge Institute.
Right, that Mauritius is a rising star, and Rwanda is in some ways comparable to Georgia. So some of these countries have started to get this right.
Yes.
And so what's the consequence of that? And what does right mean?
What they have understood, what these countries have understood, is that economic freedom is at the center for prosperity building. Rwanda, for example, Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, is explicit about it. He said he wants to be the Lee Kuan Yew he wants to be the Singapore of Africa, and Lee Kuan Yew is his model. If you take Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore as your example, then it means that, like him, you're going to have to be serious about economic freedom. And that's exactly what he did. That's what Singapore did. When Singapore figured that out, they went on to put in the right reforms to make their environment some of the most business-friendly environments in the world, one of the most free markets environment in the world. And you saw the magic of Singapore. Today, Singapore is richer than its ex-colonizer, Great Britain. So when I hear people telling me today, oh, Africa is poor because of colonization, I'm like, please, let's move on from that. Does it have maybe a tiny percentage in where we are today? Maybe, and I don't know. But I know it's not the cause, because if it were, many countless countries have been colonized before. And by the way, colonizing one another is humanity's history. It just happened that maybe Africa has been one of the last, colonized region in the world. So in our psyche, it is there, and it acts like nothing happened before to others. But flash news, it's the history of the world. We've been capturing each other back and forth, all of that.
The debate on whether colonization is responsible for the poor state of African economy has been going on for a long time. One of the most intriguing discussions on the subject is what you just saw between Jordan Peterson and Magatte Wade. There are some people who think the debate is pointless, and I tend to agree with them. Dwelling on how Africa was raped and pillaged for the benefit of the development of the West does not help Africa that much, except of course the discussions are used as a springboard for growth and advancement of the African continent. Other than that, why dwell on the past? It's not as if any of the colonizers are willing or even able to pay the requisite reparations due to Africa. For that, I agree that it is foolish to keep dwelling on a past that cannot be rectified. But does that make it true that the activities of the colonizers has no major impact on the poor economic state of Africa today? Of course not. Colonization was and is mostly responsible for the state of Africa today, and I will tell you why. Colonization had and still has a profound impact on Africa's economic, social, and political development. Here are some ways in which colonization contributed to Africa's poverty. 1. Exploitation of resources. The European colonizers exploited Africa's natural resources such as minerals, timber, and agricultural produce for their own benefit. This led to the depletion of resources, leaving the continent impoverished. 2. Unequal trade relations. The colonizers established trade relations that were heavily skewed in their own favor. They exported raw materials from Africa and imported finished goods, leading to the trade imbalance that favored the colonizers and impoverished the colonized. Number 3. Disruption of local economies. The colonizers disrupted local economies by introducing cash crops for export, which displaced subsistence agriculture and led to food shortages. This also led to the displacement of poor people from their land and communities, which disrupted social structures and created instability. 4. Political instability. The colonizers often imposed artificial borders and created artificial states that were not based on ethnic, linguistic, or cultural divisions. This led to political instability as people from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds were forced to live together in a single state. All this for the benefit of the colonizer. 5. The exploitation of labor. The colonizers also exploited African labor, often using forced labor or indentured servitude. This led to the exploitation of workers who were paid low wages and worked in harsh conditions for many, many decades. Lack of investment. The colonizers often failed to invest in infrastructure such as roads, railways, and hospitals, which were necessary for economic development. This left the continent with inadequate infrastructure, making it difficult to transport goods and services and hindering economic growth. 7. Legacy of colonialism. Finally, the legacy of colonialism has had a long impact on African development. This includes the impact of slavery, racism, and discrimination, which have had a profound impact on African society and continue to do so today. Yes, taking all this into account, Magatte Wade and Jordan Peterson are wrong. Colonization does play a role in the sorry state of African economy today. Does it mean that Africans are not responsible for their own fortune? Yes, they are. However, no matter how you look at it, whether you consider the politicians that are stealing money or whether you consider the impoverished people in society who lack basic understanding of technology, all these are tied to the legacy of colonialism in Africa. Where do you think all the money that politicians steal are invested? They're invested in the West. It seems to me that African politicians are encouraged to steal from their people and invest in Western economies. Another thing the likes of Peterson and Wade forget is the timing of African colonization. People talk of the history of the world as a history of colonization. I get it. Almost every country has been colonized in one form or another. However, not many faced a concerted effort by the West to plunder and divide. Africa was divided and plundered to build the West at a time when a new world order was just forming, a new world order of globalization and extreme capitalism. After the end of the official colonization, Africa, on its knees, was further brutalized with international policies that kept it there. The United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank did not make policies that reflected and supported the realities of African economies. What about the impact of slavery and the voluntary migration that resulted in the draining of Africa's best? This is a whole separate angle of discussion which I'm not going to get into now. Yet, I have to agree with Magatte Wade that some countries have come off colonization and are now prospering. All African countries can and will, in time, find ways to free themselves of the shackles of colonization as Rwanda and Mauritius are doing right now. But the economic, social, and cultural realities of these countries are different. Let me give you an example. In 1914, Lord Lugard of Britain amalgamated the southern and northern Nigeria, regions with very distinct cultural, lingual, and religious realities. The result is political and social instability, which many argue has constrained Nigeria, the so-called giant of Africa today. Mind you, I'm not arguing that the resultant size of Nigeria is a problem, but that the colonies were forced on each other before they were ready for such a union. Moreover, for its own benefit, Britain ensured the political dominance of one of the regions over the other, which is the basis for the distrust in the country today. This is what caused the civil war that the country has never fully recovered from. Yes, colonization is not the only reason for poverty in Africa, but it is the biggest reason for poverty in Africa.